So welcome, everyone. As I said, we really appreciate the fact that you guys have allowed yourself to walk with us. I believe it's going to be an exciting journey. And my only ask is that we should be patient, especially for those guys who probably at the beginning, there are certain things that you already know. So we are sure that by the end of the session, all of us will benefit, including myself. There are new things that I'm expecting to learn from the community through collaboration. So in today's session, we are going to talk about web and HTTP 101. So we are going back to the basics. So it might sound very obvious to some of you, but at the end of the session, I'm hoping that you guys will get to appreciate one or two things. So the objectives of this, for this session is first to appreciate the concepts that probably some of you already know: the web page or the web resources, a website, a web server, web browser, and the client, and HTTP or hypertext transfer protocol, which is something that you guys could be familiar with. We are going to create a basic website together, not fully fledged. We are going to see how we can create a basic website, and we will host it on our web server, and we are going to see HTTP in action. And my hope is that at the end of the session, you guys will have the foundational knowledge for you to create complex stuff. I always say the foundations are very basic and we cannot ignore them. So for those of you guys who are using TypeScript in development, please note the foundation of TypeScript is JavaScript. So if you do not appreciate certain things in JavaScript, then you will not probably have a very good experience when you're looking at the rest of the things. So we are going back to the basics, and the reason for going back to the basics is to help us appreciate these things that are sort of complex. Before you even talk about containers, you have to go back and see what you are dealing with before the containers came. Before you talk about APIs, there was just the basic of pages and HTTP in play. So we are going to I'm going to give you just some background information on how the web came to be and the various things that you should never forget, and how those things, and at later stages, you'll see how those things will connect. So when you talk about things like advanced concepts like securing your APIs, when you're looking at maybe TLS, for some of you might have heard about TLS, you look at things like authentication or authorization on the APIs, bearer tokens, OAuth 2. Those are all concepts that build up from the basic concepts that you're going to practice today. So I will move straight. For you to get maximum benefit, we will need certain tools to help us appreciate this. A web browser, I believe all of you have web browsers. Web server, Apache HTTP server is what you're going to use for this session, but there are many other web browsers out there. You could have Microsoft IIS, you could have Nginx, you could have Apache Tomcat, you could have Jetty, you could have many other web servers that could serve the pages. So we'll also look at a network trace viewer. In this specific case, we'll look at WireShark. And we will also need an editor. I know Wesley uses Atom. I am going to use VS Code. You can use an editor of your choice. And we also have our web clients, Postman, wget, and curl. And all these tools that you're talking about, if there is a tool that you don't know, I could probably ask you to just type on the chat any of the tools that you've never interacted with. And I will take about 1 minute to just confirm where we are. So if there is a tool that you have not interacted with, or the brother to the tool, so if you use Atom or even Notepad, you can say you have an editor or you interacted with an editor. So if there is a tool that you have never interacted with, please comment on the chat so that I can also know what to focus on. So I can see most of the guys, few people talking about Postman, majority are talking about WireShark, others are talking about curl and get or wget. So at least that gives me a good picture of what to focus on. Thank you guys for the feedback. So then I'll just move straight. You'll get a chance to see all these tools in play. So do not worry. So I'll move on to the next slide. And one of the things that I'd like to mention is that when you're dealing with web development, in this bootcamp, our focus is doing web development. And when we say web development, is not just one module that does everything. So we'll create a web app or a single page application. We'll create a web app using the technology stack that will be provided. And we will also have APIs, and those APIs will be interacting with certain DBs, and there are certain process flows that have to be implemented on the backend. But before we get there, we also need to appreciate that we are doing all those things because of one guy who is called Tim Berners-Lee, who we call the father of the World Wide Web. And the World Wide Web is different from the internet. I know some of you might confuse the two. The internet was probably brought into the life in the 60s and 70s. That's when a lot of efforts were being made to internetwork various networks that were local networks. So you'll find that a university and maybe DOD, they were trying to ensure that they can communicate. So the protocols wars happened in 1970. And I love a lot of, I always love looking at the history so that we can look at things in the right context. So the basic idea was Tim Berners-Lee, who is, the guy is still around, and he was in Kenya, I think sometimes back, a few years back. He actually came to Kenya and visited iHub, if I'm not wrong. And the idea was the computers had developed. TCP/IP protocol had been adopted. Networking happened in the 70s and early 80s. The internet was becoming quite popular. And of course, it was the thing of the West, because as some of you might be aware, that the first computer to be connected to the internet from Africa was actually in Uganda in 1994. So, but all through 20 years, guys were dealing with computers. So in this case, there was a technology that had been invented, which was called, I think it was called hyperlink, and someone could actually click on a document, and you're able to open another document on another computer. And Tim Berners-Lee decided to apply the same concept for the World Wide Web. So he basically came up with a way to ensure that we can merge all the technologies that were there, the use of computers, data networks, and hypertext or hyperlink into the powerful and easy to use global information system. So the guy wanted to put information so that people can actually access. So you know the whole idea of a link within our website that connects you to another link. So you can have one website linking you to another website, and together they form the World Wide Web. So the basic idea was started in 1989 when Tim Berners-Lee came up with a paper. And in 1989, that's when he wrote the paper. And in 1990, he actually built the first solution to illustrate that. And at this particular point, I'll just shift a bit so that I can also give you some context. And all this information is available for you to see. But this is what happened. This guy, who is a British scientist, came up with that idea. And you can come here and see that he actually developed the first web server and the first web browser in 1990, demonstrating his ideas. And of course, that machine was supposed to be always available. So he wrote, this machine is a server, do not power it down. So essentially, that was the first web server and the first web browser created by Tim Berners-Lee. As part of that, he also specified how the web server and the web browser, as we know them today, are supposed to communicate. And as a result, he actually came up with what we call the HTTP protocol, or the hypertext transfer protocol, which was basically a protocol. Rules, when you hear a protocol, I know some of you attend political rallies and you hear all protocols observed. Basically means when all the rules are observed, with respecting the rules, so computers can actually communicate with each other. So you have web server that has certain information that is needed by a web browser, and how they communicate. He actually crafted a standard way or a rule book that we can use, which today we call as HTTP. So this is information that you can access, and you can see on 12 November when he wrote the document and he said, you know, hypertext is a way to link and access information, came up. This was the first time no one knew what hypertext is. And he wrote this document, which I'll share in the presentation so that you guys can go and look at it. But during that time, you'll see how he has drafted. It's a short document, just a 9-page document, which would allow you to appreciate the initial idea that these people had. So you can see the building blocks. He said browsers and servers are 2 building blocks to be provided. And he came up with a browser, which he said is an application, a software running on a machine, and then a server, which is a software running on a server machine. So the server machine is the one that probably is central, but the browsers run on our local machines or the cloud machines. So you can read through, and I'm sure by just reading it will help you just appreciate what was happening in the world. So as a result, if I go back to the presentation, as a result, we got ourselves with new acronyms. In technology, we love using acronyms. So we had the World Wide Web, which is www. So if you ever type www on the website, you're basically saying that that machine is on the World Wide Web. And then he came up with HTML, which was hypertext markup language. Just to let you know, by the time hypertext markup language was being developed, there was SGML, which happened earlier, and there was also XML, and HTML was a new markup language. Markup language, they use tags. I know some of you might be familiar with them when you have, you know, the HTML, the opening, less than sign, and then the greater than sign, and you can have rules around how you create those tags. I know some of you love saying that we are developers and you post those symbols that have the angle brackets or the less than or greater than sign. So hypertext transfer protocol was basically a specification of how the data was supposed to be transferred from the web server to the web client, which is the browser in that case. Why browser? Because you could browse the files. You could click and navigate through the links. You can move from one place to the other. Of course, HTTP came when IP was there, the internet protocol. Some of you might be quite familiar. The computers started, a lot of work in computing happened in the 1940s and 50s. And when we got the transistors, we got now those microchips, and you know, everything has always been better after that. And internet protocol happened in the 60s and 70s. That's when the protocol wars were happening. And finally, IP, TCP/IP won, or what we use today as TCP/IP. So I know some of you have heard about OSI model, but you've never probably related with a protocol at layer 6. Because what we use today is basically TCP/IP, that after the transport layer, we go to the application layer, and all the other things are collapsed together into the application layer. So HTTP rides on TCP/IP, which the focus for today is not to help you appreciate TCP and IP, but I hope that I'll get a chance to also demystify some of those things. So because of that, I'll now go straight to the main content of today so that we can quickly move on into the hands-on session, because I know your lecturers, for those of you who went to school or those who are in school, your lecturers have done a good job of sharing this content. So my work is not to just bore you with the same theory stuff. My work is to ensure that you can connect everything together. So when you talk about our website, we create HTML pages. So some of you might be aware of index.html, or sometimes depending on scripting languages that you use, which is another concept that we will mention, you will find maybe you have index.php, index.js, depending on the language that you're using, or JSP or even ASP, based on the scripting language that you're using, which is a new concept that we mentioned. So basically, HTML defines the tags, the various components on your user interface, whether it's a form, the input, the buttons. HTML defines how you can define that. Of course, we deal with CSS, which is cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheet allows us to define the layout, the look. So the colors that you're going to use, the positioning, and just the UI basically look. And I don't want to focus on that because I know some of you are quite familiar with that. Now, JavaScript files are also part of the websites that we create, or the web applications that we create. And JavaScript files basically allow us to add animations within your web applications and also interactivity. So when you want to show someone a pop-up or a button or a dialogue, JavaScript comes in handy in that sense. So when you're creating websites, we all have those three files. I know some of you might be wondering, I don't use CSS. I use another, I don't know whether it's SAS or something. Those are derivatives that allow you to one day acknowledge CSS as a programming language because you have an import and no one should throw stones. So maybe you want to have certain capabilities, reuse of your classes and all that. So those things help you have an easier time as a developer. But at the end of the day, all those files have to be compiled back to the CSS files because the browsers understand CSS. Same case applies to JavaScript. So if you use TypeScript, which was a language that was created by Microsoft, and it is an open one, so we can all look at it and use it. But the whole idea was to ensure that JavaScript doesn't have a lot of type restriction. So you can actually have a function that takes two numbers, adds them. But then in JavaScript, if you pass a string, hello plus 6, it will not give an error. But now TypeScript has a lot of capabilities to ensure that you have less errors as developer. But again, I want to remind you that TypeScript, before you deploy, at the time of building your application for the sake of deploying it on the server, someone has to convert the TypeScript scripts into JavaScript. So at the end of the day, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript rule the web, although sometimes we might be writing things that are looking a bit different. So I wanted to mention that. Of course, we have images, we have CSVs or JPEG, CSVs, and PDF. And if you are from Kenya, this is not something that you're struggling in. Even the lawyers know the difference between CSV, JPEG, and PDF. And of course, many other files, whether it's audio files, all those things, we call them the different media types that we can have within our websites. So essentially, everything that you put together there forms the website. So it's a collection of web pages and resources that can be accessed on the browser. So we have a website is a set of related web pages located under a single domain. I know I've introduced a new name like google.com or meliora.co.k. That's a domain. And that are produced by either a single person or an organization. So websites make up the World Wide Web because every organization has the website, and then Google comes and connects your website when you search, and they have a link to your website. And through all these, we get the World Wide Web. Now, for you to, and I'm doing this, it could be very trivial, but just bear with us. We are doing this because there are some guys who probably have not appreciated the basics. So every time you create a website and you have those HTML, CSS, JavaScript files, and sometimes other files like .php, .asp, when you're doing Perl and Python scripts, you have to move them to a server. Just like we saw Tim Berners-Lee saying that the computer that he had set to be running the web server software should not be shut down. So those servers must be up, and you push your files to those web servers. So how do you push your files? You can either use SFTP or SCP. Why am I indicating this? Sometimes today you might not deploy the website using FTP or SCP. where SFTP is Secure File Transfer Protocol, which is another rule of uploading a file to a server. And sometimes you use tools that can allow you to push or download a file from a server that supports FTP. Or sometimes if you are using shell, we use secure copy, which is basically like the CP command, which is copy, that takes, you're copying something from here to there. But now secure copy allows you to copy a file from one machine to another machine, another folder that is in a different machine. So this is what we do. And I'm going to demonstrate that, because the day we start talking about Docker images and all those things, and even all the technologies you're going to learn, you'll see what problem each of the technology or each of the idea is trying to address. So you must know what HTML is fixing, CSS is fixing, containers are fixing, what problem are we facing, orchestration, what were we facing. So you must appreciate those things so that now you can become a better engineer. So we host these things on the web server. And on the web server, because we have already said that a website is a collection of files of very different types that are grouped together to form something that works for you. So the web servers always have a folder, just like your laptop has a folder. When you develop, you put your files into a folder. But web servers have a folder called the document root. So every web server, whether you're using Apache, Nginx, they must give you the document root. And that is the place where you dump your files that you have developed. Or those files that are within that folder, they can be accessed unless the permissions do not allow. Of course, on your machine, you could have many other files, but only document root is accessible from publicly through a web server. Anything else is not visible, and that's something that you need to know. So the root, the starting point for any web server is the document root. So if you say a certain server / then you say CSS. So it means that you're going to that server, to the document root of that web server, and you access a specific folder. Now, the other thing that you need to know is that, as Tim Berners-Lee indicated, that for you to access any website, you need a web browser. And of course, this I won't spend a lot of time talking about that, because you know. But sometimes we also access a web server using other web clients, web browser being one of the clients, but we have other web clients. And for us to access, I hope you have seen this thing that has just come up. We have HTTP as the protocol that governs accessing the servers, accessing the resources, the web resources, whether they are HTML files, CSS, or those web pages that you create and other files that are within your website. They are all accessed from the browser using the HTTP protocol. So it's basically the protocol that is used for transfer of hypertext files, or those HTML, CSS, and all that. So it's the HTTP protocol is used in that. Now, web clients can also be referred to as HTTP clients. Why? Because they are web, yes, but web access is governed by the HTTP protocol. So if you hear a HTTP client or a web client, don't get confused. We could be referring to the same thing. So please note, sometimes, and I know some of you have built APIs, consumed APIs, even your library that makes an API call is also a web client. So we have standard clients that are there. wget is normally available on Linux servers, I believe. I don't know whether Windows uses wget. Curl is another client that you use on the command line, on the terminal. So you can do curl. So if you want to get a website, you can go to the browser and type www.meliora.co.ke and you get the page. Or you can go to basically the command line or the terminal and you say wget, then you say http:/the file that you need or the resource that you need to access. So wget is a command line tool, curl is a command line tool, Postman is a command line tool. some of you might be asking, at what point do you use these tools? Web browser, you use it for the browsing, even it's used by the non-users. Postman is another tool, and I'll just share here. And Postman is such a tool here that allows us, when we create APIs, like now I had created an API, which I had done sometimes back. And the key idea is that I want to calculate the VAT. I have the amount and I know the rate. So I just want to calculate the VAT. So I know the tax is 24 and this is 174. So when you're dealing with APIs, you will find that we actually use Postman to deal with some of these requests, to make a HTTP call. So at the end of the day, whether I'm accessing this thing through Postman, it is sending a HTTP request. And that's why you see every URL starts with the word HTTP to indicate the protocol. Although some of you might see HTTPS, which is a secure HTTP protocol, which we will discuss later. But for now, just understand we are talking about HTTP. We will see what HTTPS is trying to solve in a different session. So that's a tool. Now, if I want to come and get that URL, let me just come and get this URL. On my laptop here, I have a terminal, and I can actually come and create a new tab, and I can come and use wget. It depends on whether you have wget on your laptop, but basically what it does, it gets this file for us. Sorry, I think I don't have wget on this machine. I thought I had. Don't worry, but you can install wget, and what it will do is it will get for you the file. So if you have an image and you don't have a browser and you want to download, you can use those commands. When does this apply, or when does when do you apply this? Some of these clients. If you work in an organization that if you are in a server and you want to access a file from another server, you can actually do wget because you don't have a browser within servers. Most of the servers don't have GUI, so you can't open a browser to try and send a command. So in that case, curl wget come in handy. So don't worry about that, but we'll be able to illustrate that as we continue. So I will show you, I'll log into 2 servers, and I'll ensure that I use wget to show you how to get the file onto the server. And I'll also use curl to get the file from the server. So I think I will end there. And now we will move to the coding. But before we move to the coding, I will also share the references for us to look at it. So I will come and create a basic HTML file. Our guiding slide is this one. So I'll come and create a file. I had already started doing some work, but we will work on this together. So I have a file that I've created. So I have a folder here, and I can come here and open the terminal so that some of you can see. So I'm within a certain folder that has resources folder and a file called index.html. So here we can come and call it our VAT calculator. Yes, we can call it VAT calculator page. So of course, you guys, I know you are familiar with HTML. You have to start with doc type and HTML tag. Then there is the header and the body. And of course, in the header, you can have so many things. So for now, we are going to create a CSS folder. So I'll come here and I'll create a folder and I call it CSS. If you have any questions, please ensure that you chat, and I'll also create another folder called JS. And in the CSS, I will come and create a file called main.css. And the basic idea would be to come and just get some styles created there. But before we do the styles, let's come and create a body. I just want to create a form on this page. And this page, what I'm going to do is I'll create a form. And before I create the form, I'll create a div here, and I call it maybe class, the image, or maybe the logo. So I also come and create another div here, and I call it, and I'm not a guru in HTML, CSS. I'm not a UI UX engineer, but I have the basics to help us move forward. So we'll come here and say the main, and then I'll come here and create the last div, and I'll call it the footer. Now on the logo, I'll come here and I do image tag. I think I can do source, and then under resources, I have a folder called natujenge.csv. And of course, some of you know how to, you can do alt and then you can just say Natujenge. So I can use that. When I do like this, it means that I am using the XHTML, which is HTML that follows the rules of XML. So that's not the topic of today. So in the main, I'll create a form. Now, I know some of you in class, you learned about method, and you can say get, and then you also learned about action. Remember, as we are not using, we are creating a web app. So the forms, and then of course you expected to have a button here. You'll have an input of type button. For those of you who have learned, actually we have an input of type submit. No, we are not going to use that. We'll use button because we are going to control everything from the front end. So there is no need of having that. Of course, I can have an ID and I call it, maybe this is the button is calculate. And the class, I can also call it maybe calculate, or maybe I can call it PTN primary. Maybe. Just trying to write on that. And then you have the, yeah. So you have the name, and the name is, you can have it calculate. That's what we display. So I don't need this, because one of the things that I am removing this, because that used to be the old fashion of doing things. Nowadays in JavaScript, you can have on click and we can call a function. Maybe we call a function called calculate. So today I'll not focus on JavaScript, but when someone clicks that button, a certain event is triggered, and that event will do the calculation. So, but here I'll come and create a label, and you normally have a label for, and the label for amount. I know some of you are good, and then you'll come here and say amount, and we can do break, because I believe in XHTML, I can do that. So I have a label for the amount, and then of course I can have an input. I can do type. What's the value of the input when you need a number? Yes, let's do a number. I don't want to do text. And then you can have the ID. The identifier, every tag within the XML can be identified. So here it will be there, the amount, and the name would be the amount, and that's it. And of course, I will also do that. Now, I'll then have another label. Of course, here I'll break again, and then I'll have another label for the tax amount, the rate, the tax rate, and here I'll call it the rate. And then, of course, here, of course, I can come here and I can do heading 1, VAT calculator. Please note that the focus is not to show you HTML. You'll play with it. If you're not familiar, then you'll have to find some time and play with all these things. But for now, the key idea is to just help you appreciate a few things about HTTP, which requires me to do this. So this is what you're going to do. And of course, I can come here and yeah. So then I'll have another div called results. Or maybe you can have a div and you can call it class. You call it form. And then I can come here and copy everything that I had done into that form. Wesley, I hope I'm doing well. Huh? You are surprised that I can do CSS. So in this case, I've used ID. There are some places where we're using classes. There are some places where we are using IDs. So don't worry about this, and I will come here and I'll just explain to you some of these things. So if I do this and I come and look for this folder, I think I had done repos, and I put this here, and I can come and open this. I can double click it, and of course I get this form. I think there is a tag that I have closed wrongly. Okay, yeah, that's it. So of course, let me see whether the button, oh, the button has no value. I didn't put the value. Actually, we just say the value, not the name. So here you can have a value of, and you say calculate. Just in the same spirit, maybe I don't even need to give it a name. Actually, we can say calculate here. The button is calculate. Now, when you do label for amount, the name must be amount. So you're saying this is a label for this guy, and this is the label for this guy. So this is rate, and the ID is rate, and the type is number. So of course, you can have a default value, and maybe the value for rate is 16% if you're in Kenya, and the amount could be, we could start with 100. So it means that our form will have default values. So if I come here and do that, then you'll see that. Now I'll just do something little to ensure that we can deal with styling. So if you're dealing with styling, you can come here and you add link, and then you say, I think the type, yeah, style sheet. Sorry, sometimes you forget these things. Let me just, I had done something on GitHub, which I will share with you guys, so that you can also see what we use. Yes, you do not type, it's rel. So I can come here and put this, and I say it's actually CSS main.css. So please note that this file here, which is index, assumes there is a folder called CSS, then main.css. So I'll also come here and I'll create another file, which is not normal, but I'll call it main.js. Now for JavaScript, what you do for JS is you actually come here, and in the body, you can include, JavaScript can be included in the body or in the header. So I'll come here and create another JavaScript. So in JavaScript, we say script. I think we also say the source. And then you say JS, and then you do that, and then you close like that. So by doing that, it's essentially whatever you type here will be copied inside these two tags. So when you say the source, and it's the same case here, when you say you're having a link, you are linking a CSS, a style sheet, then it's essentially sort of coming and creating style tag and copying everything that is inside this main.css into that tag. So what you're going to do is this. I will just illustrate just a few things to come to, so that we can deploy our website onto a server. So this is a test page by Natujenge team. So I can do that, and maybe I can put P just to ensure that it's a paragraph. Then the result here, and I can put a comment in HTML. I think a comment, how do you put a comment? Yeah, you put a comment. We will use this to print the final answer. So here I'm showing you how 3 technologies can be put together to create an interactive web application without using a script on the server. So I'm using JavaScript, CSS, and this. So here, remember when I created the index.html, I said on click, invoke a function called calculate. So the browser assumes that there is a function called calculate within your JavaScript files. So remember, we've already attached the JavaScript file here in the body. And now we can come here and put the function here. So I can come and create a function. And that function, I'll call it calculate. Or maybe I can calculate local, because at some point we will now invoke later to calculate remote. Yeah, so I call it calculate local. And for those of you who do JavaScript, you know that there is a thing that we use, we call console.log, that allows you to just say calculate local invoked. So it has been invoked, and what I can do is to just try that. And of course, I'll come here and use some of the developer tools, and I can invoke there, and I can come here and test page by Natujenge. Remember, it doesn't look so nice, but when I click that, it says this has been clicked. So if I want to make it exciting, I can say alert and say, you know what, calculate local invoked. Now, please note, the focus today is don't get confused. Yeah, so you can see calculate local invoked. Now, what we do here, I will introduce you to something quite exciting. And in JavaScript, you declare variables. You can use let, amount, b, and so there is something called document.get element by ID. So HTML allows you to have elements. So elements are these things that you have here. So if I want to get the element, I'll get the element with ID amount. It's always good to use. You can see there are many get element by class name, by tag name. The unfortunate bit about class name, tag name, there could be many elements with the same class name. Like Wesley could create a thing and the class that is called maybe container is used in so many places. So sometimes you use get element by ID because ID is meant to be unique unless you're a bad developer. So I can do that and then I can say inner text. So I get the text and basically what it means is that whatever is typed in this, it will be picked by this guy. But of course, I think I need to look for something else. HTML doesn't allow that amount can be a string. So we need to convert it into a number. I had done this before, so don't worry. So I can do parseInt. In JavaScript, there is a method called parseInt, converting that thing into a number so that you can do the mathematical computations. And then, of course, you can say let the rate be. You do parseInt, the inner text, whatever text you get. And then, of course, is it the inner text or the value? You can actually do value. Yes. And then you can pick value, what the value of this element is, and you can do rate there. So once you have these things, again, because we are developers and we want to be sure that we are picking the right thing, not to say that in production you're supposed to enable a lot of login, but you can say amount, and then you print the amount for us. Of course, you do the same for the rate. And of course, once you do that, we have to come and compute two things. So the first thing is we'll say let the tax be the amount times the rate, of course, divide by 100% for those of you who know how to compute. This is mathematical. So we get that. And I can come here and I can do console and I come here and do tags. So for those guys who are, you use Angular, React, you need to first appreciate the basics of JavaScript and then the rest of the things become much easier. Of course, I can come here and now figure out the total amount. So let me call it the total amount. And of course, the total amount will be the amount that we got plus the tax. That's what is the total amount. And I can come here and I log it on the console. When you log anything on the console, you see the stuff appearing here on the web developer tools. How do you access it? Inspect. Of course, we'll record this video just in case you need to come back. You can revisit. And this is for the guys who say, I'm a backend engineer. I don't care about frontend. Our intention is to ensure that you take care of everything. It doesn't mean that I do frontend, but I need to appreciate what the rest of the team does so that I can become a better engineer. So that you stop giving them vague requests. In collaboration, you need to be very clear. But if you don't know what the guy does, then it becomes very difficult. Now, one of the things that I would like to, I will come here and say, maybe the content that we want to use, we'll come and say the tax amount. Then I come here and I say the amount. And then I can concatenate for those of you, and then I can say the total amount is, then I come and do the total. So basically we have done a basic thing. And again, in the same spirit of a login, I can come here and can just say the content that we have. Now, this content could be the HTML content that you have to do. So one of the things that we can do, once we do that, remember on the page here, we have a div that we cannot see. There is a div called result that is empty. And I want to come here and look at the div called result that is empty. Here, this one. So it is served by the ID result. Why did I use ID? Because it has to be unique identifier. Ideally, you're not supposed to repeat. Maybe you could have ID and you could have class result. So, but I will just use ID for now because I want to inject content into this div from my JavaScript. So for those of you, when I say JavaScript is used to make the page exciting, make it interactive, this is exactly what we need to do. So you're going to use the magic thing called document again. And we'll come here and say document.getElementID. The element we need to go is called result. And then I come and say inner HTML is our content. And that's it. So by doing so, we will have said, we'll have basically, and here I can come and print something and say, just to say, to indicate the end of the call. So what we've done, if you guys can see, we used HTML, and if you go and study HTML, because I have given you these links, you go back to what Tim Berners-Lee, W3 Schools, this is a tutorial by them. So they came here and told you that there are certain things called HTML, events. Just go through these things, even if you're a backend developer. Go through these things and ensure that you appreciate, I think there are HTML elements, types, and attributes. So you can come and skim through this content, ensure you appreciate what these things are, and then you can come back and at least try and do these things. So what we've done is we've used the inbuilt capability within JavaScript that says on a tag, you can have button, you can have on click, and then you can specify the function. As long as the function is within this file. Of course, it doesn't have to be within the HTML file. What we did is we included the JavaScript file, which ideally copies a content of JS main.js into this file. So from a technical perspective, this file has the functions, the JavaScript functions. So you can come and ensure that you implement the logic. Once you implement the logic, that we come and get the amount, get the rate from the form. Remember, we are going to the document. The document is this guy here, the index.html or the HTML file. And then, of course, we get the amount, we convert them into integers, then we do the tax, we do the total, we log these things, and then finally, we go and tell the div called result, we put the inner HTML to be the content that we provide. So essentially what you're doing by doing so, we're basically saying the text that we created should be injected there. So, and that's what I'm going to do right now. And we are going to now test this and see whether it works. Of course, I have commented. So if you see, this does the magic for us. And in case you cannot see, I'll just make the screen a bit bigger. So if I come here and put 2000 and I click that, then I'm able to see calculate local invoked 2000, the rate, oh, sorry, this is wrong. I think I just need to correct the log here. In the JavaScript file, I just come here and correct this and say it's the rate. And because of that, I can refresh, and then I can come here and do 2000, and I can come and do that. So you can see it's 2000, 16% gives us 320, 320 plus the original 2000 gives us that amount. So essentially, we've gotten the page. And we have our website, and because of time, I will not, let me just come here and create one tag, and we're going to just style one thing. I'll style one thing, and this thing, I'll call it the body, and I'll have here the class and called container. So when you're styling elements, there are three ways of styling, and I'm going to use three approaches of styling. So I can say heading 1, I want to use the color to be blue, navy blue, navy blue, navy. Yes, I can use that. So this way, you're styling based on the tag element. But if your element is actually a class called a container, I can come here and there is a guy who needs to mute. I can use dot to use the class, and I know Wesley, you take guys through this, but I can say the width is maybe 500 pixels, and the margin on both sides should be, maybe I can say 10 pixels on the top and bottom, and auto on the left and right. So if I do that, you can see now what styling can do. So at least for now, we are good. The key focus from here is to focus on HTTP, because that's what probably most of you are not familiar with. So what I'll do is I have my folder here. I don't know whether there is any question, Marlene.
Let me check through the chat and see if there's anything.
Robert Gidinje can see make a difference where you want to insert HTML element. Though I don't know whether you have a question. Is there any significant difference between inner HTML and inner text? I think there is, even when I come here, the whole idea, my brother Duo, is when you say get element by ID, and then you put the ID there, and you say inner HTML, inner text. Inner HTML returns, if you look at this thing, it returns sort of an XML based. You assume that the content is an XML based thing. Inner text will return you the text, a string value of that. But maybe what we could do is to see whether it makes a difference. We'll add there. But again, this is one of the things that I need you guys to go and look at. As you look at it, it doesn't make a huge difference. So when you say inner HTML, it means the content is a HTML. When you say inner text, it means that the content is text. So if this thing was HTML, you could do inner HTML, or if it was text, you could do inner text as it is. But you need to see whether there are any constraints or behaviors that are governed by whether you use inner text. What difference does it make? Maybe this is something that I can allow you to. Inner text is a single line. Inner HTML is an entire div, ID, or class. Thank you very much, T, for helping us in that. Please note, the focus here is to ensure that we share what we know and we guide others. So I'll end there, and I will now move and I will copy this code into the server, so that now I can give you the IP to access that code. Now, this is my folder, and you can confirm that I have resources, CSS, JS, and index.html. I also have, I need to copy to a certain server. So that server, I will come here and put documents, my scripts. And then there is a server on Scaleway that we're using, that we are going to use. Of course, you'll know the IP, the root password. You're not using the password, we're using as a key. Today, the focus is not for us to learn this stuff. So I am going to go to the server first. So I will go, sorry, I exited the tab. So I'll go here to my scripts, and I will basically cut Scaleway.168. And I can run this command. For those of you who know SSH to log into a server, if you don't know this, probably we will figure out, we will do another basic class on this. But the key idea here is I log into the server, assume that the username is root, the password is not there, but I'm using a security key to log in. So once I log into this server, it's one of our dev servers that we have. So what I can do is we have Apache installed. Now, one of the things that I'll allow you guys to go and read, visit our website, and there is an article that I had done sometimes back on the 7 questions you need to answer to understand something. So if you want to master HTTP, you need to answer these 7 questions. So I'll share this link with you guys so that later you can read it. And I want in the groups, maybe you could actually find out the 7 questions as far as Apache is concerned. But I will mention something. On Linux, we check whether the server is running by using this HTTPD. This is Apache HTTP server. And you can see here, it is what you're running. And it is normally running on port 80. I'll use another command here, which if some of you, I can come here and say grep.80. Sorry. And I can grep listen. So one of the things that I will mention is that the server is actually running on port 80 here. You can see it's listening for connections. Now, again, another thing I'll mention about Apache is that Apache, the root folder is var www.html. So when I come here, if you build your website, you're supposed to put your stuff here. But because we are on Natujenge, I'll go to Natujenge and I'll create a folder called There is also another folder called software engineering bootcamp, and I'll come here and I'll make a folder called demo. Now, if I come here and I come to demo, I'll find that there is nothing. For some of you could note is that, remember, the root folder is this, and then of course here we have NatujengeOYF/demo. So if I go to the browser, I'm going to come here and I will copy the file so that I know the IP address. So if I go to the browser and put this guy here, please note I have not copied the files, but I just want to go to the browser and I'll put that, and I will come and copy this path here, which by now we know it's Natujenge as software engineering bootcamp demo. So we can come here and I can copy this and I put that there. Now, of course, if I do this, it tells me that the directory is empty because we know that there is nothing we've put there. But we want to put our website. Please note, when you type this, and of course the end URL, and I can give you guys on the chat so that you see. The URL looks like this if I paste it on a notepad. It looks like this. So it's HTTP, the protocol, the server. It doesn't say the port, but there is a port 80, which I will have another session to help you guys appreciate what ports are and why do we even discuss about them. Then, of course, it gives us the root. This is / it means the root, but not the root of the server, but the document root, which we know is var. If I come here, we already know that the root folder is var www.html. Of course, then we say / Natujenge / software engineering / demo, and we get that. Now, the question that I want to answer right now is, how do I move this stuff to my server? I can have an SFTP client and I can transfer the files via FTP, or I can use SCP, which is what I'm going to use right now. Maybe you've never used SCP, at least you're going to use it right now. So the key idea is, please note, this tab here is on my local machine, and this tab here is on the server. So if I can clear this tab here is on the server. So if I do ls here, it has nothing. But if I come and do ls here, it has everything. 3 folders and 1 file. So what do I do? When you do copy, you normally say copy path to file. Maybe the file is .txt, and then you give the path to destination. So if some of you already know that, you can copy something on command line using this command, from to. But because we are doing remote copy, we can use secure copy. I can say everything in this folder, but where are we copying them to? We are copying them into this server. Now, this is where the difference between secure copy and normal copy. So you're saying copy everything to where? You copy it to. First, give the IP, the username and the IP address. So user at IP. Then you put a full colon. Then you actually give the full path of where you want to copy the files into. So I'll come here and I copy this and I put them here. So for those of you who didn't know SCP, that's how you do it. But now, because I don't have a password, if I try to do this, it will ask me for the password, and I don't have the password for this thing. So I use the same command that I've used before, but then here I'll come and say what? -I to specify the PEM file or the security key for logging in into that folder. So I can come here and I can put this is the folder. Of course, if you're using Linux, these commands will work. If you're using Windows, you might need to download an FTP client like FileZilla. That's what we used to use in our days. I don't know whether FileZilla is still used today, but that's why we have many people in the team to tell us what they do when they are doing it on HTML. So I have that, and I just want to copy this, and this is my security key to the server. Of course, I can't show you the content of that file, because if I show you, then you can access our server. And then, of course, we will, if you need a server, we will figure out how to help you so that you do that. So by doing so, it is copying, but then it says that CSS is not a file. So even copy, normal copy, we normally have an issue with copying a folder. So if you want to copy a folder, then you have to add another switch in the command. Remember, the key idea was SCP. What are you SCPing to where? But now we put -I, we put the key. And then we put -R to mean that we want to do it recursive. So I can copy and the files will go there. So here, and you can see now everything moving, the CSV and all that we have here. So if I come now to the server and I do ls, magic, we have the file. So because the file now is on the server, I've basically created the files, copied them into a web server, into a folder called document root. And now I can go to the browser and access it. And finally, we will be able to experiment. So when you access it, according to Tim Berners-Lee in his document, he said that if you type a folder like this, the web server will go to the document root, look for a folder called Natujenge. Sees it. Looks for another folder called SWE, sees it, and looks for another folder called demo and sees it. And then inside that folder, it looks for a file with index.html, index.php, index.jsp, or index.something. That's the default behavior of the web servers. So by doing so, I'll be able to click on that. And voila, we are able to get our code. Of course, what is happening now is if I go to the console, it will have the same behavior like we did. So I can come here and do 2000 and I can see that. So essentially what we have done is we've created a website, we've deployed it, and we've accessed it through a web browser. I can also access the website and I'll use a different server. I don't know whether I have wget. How did I not have wget here? Okay. Let me just wget. Okay. So I will log in into another server and I will get a file and you'll see how wget works. So I'll log into another, I'll open another terminal here. Please note the first terminal is local. If I do print working directory, it's local. The second tab is the server. You can see we're on the server. And then the third tab, I want to use it now to log into a third server. Actually, I'll come here and look at the SMSC server. There is another server that we have. Now, for those of you, and I'll do sudo to change to root user. And I will make a small directory here and I call it Natujenge. I go to Natujenge. I'll come here and I'll do, let me see whether the command is there. Wget is not there, so I can do yum install wget. This is how you install wget on a server. So since these guys didn't have wget, I will install it and I can say yes. I hope it will take a short time to install and voila, done. So we have that. So I can come now and do wget. Of course, it tells me I'm missing the URL. So which URL am I going to access? I will access our URL that we just created, this one here. So I'll copy and I'll come here and I'll do wget and I will come here and paste. Of course, you can see it has said that it has saved the data here. If I come here and do index.html, of course, some of you can already see where we are going. We are connecting to the server. Here we didn't put the port. This is the server. This is the port. We connected. We send the request. We are waiting for the response. We got 200 and then we got the length and we are saving what we got back into this file. And the saving is complete. We have this file. And now if I go to the disk, I'll be able to see that file. If I do ls, I'll see the file. If I come here and I do index.html, you can see our calculator code has been downloaded. So wget and the browser, they are both clients, only that wget is is a tool that you use to see whether you can get the file remotely. So if I want to get a file from another server and I'm on a server that doesn't have a GUI like this one, this is server 2 called Ishizaka. And of course, we had our server 1, which has a different name. It's called UCM Dev. So this server here is able to get the web page, and we can see the web page here. And if I want to get the image, I can actually come here and say wget. And what it will do is it will go in the demo. There is a resources folder. I think there was a resources folder, and there is natujenge.svg. I think there was such a file. And if I come here, I'll find the SVG here. Yeah. So for those of you who know SVG, this is actually how SVG looks like. It's a vector for those of you who love maths. So it's just another way of representing images that is much, much better for rendering without distorting the quality. So because it uses the vectors to represent the data that you want to, the graph that you want to draw. So it just draws the image on the screen. So I hope that gives you an idea. I can also use curl. So in case curl is not here, you can come here and I can install curl. Remember, we're on the second server. I hope I'm not confusing someone. Wow, and time is moving quite fast before I finish. So curl is already there. So I can just do curl. And once I do curl, I can actually come and paste the URL again. So you can see curl is actually printing the data on the screen. So if I want to do curl, then I do CSS, main.css. You can see the CSS file has been printed on the screen. And of course, if I open my code here that I had here, you can confirm that the CSS was 10 lines of code. And this is how it was looking like. So that's how curl, get, browser, all of them are HTTP clients. And they are able to retrieve a file from a web server by specifying the server. And in addition to that, specifying the file that you want to get, or sometimes we call it the resource. And this now sets stage to my last part, where I'll just show you what exactly is HTTP. But before I move to HTTP, I would like to find out whether there is anyone with a question. I know we have seen curl. I know we've seen wget. We've seen the browser. We've seen the server. We've seen how the files are created. And I've also attempted to behave like a front-end developer and did some basic thing with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, and an image to be able to help us create a website. Now we've put them together. We've hosted them on the server within the folder called the www folder, or the document root, sorry. But if you're using Apache, it's var www/html by default. You can change if you want to change the setting of there where the folder is. But by doing so, I've actually demonstrated how all these things work. Is there anyone with a burning question? And I will basically ask you guys to shoot the question. And I'll also ask whether it's okay if we can do maybe another 25 minutes, and I will show you guys what HTTP request looks like, what are the parts that you should never forget. And eventually that information will help you when you're discussing even APIs and all those things. Things will become much easier. Swali. Yes, Mac runs on Linux. Are you using Linux or are you using CLI on Mac? I'm using, okay, sorry, there are two things, Bwana Boaz, and good to see you. I remember you. I met you somewhere. And we are using, I'm on my first tab, I'm on my local machine, because you can see this is Mac. I'm using the normal terminal on Mac, and Mac is based on Unix. Linux is also based on Unix. So you always find that there are a lot of common things. I transitioned. I must confess that I was forced to move to Mac. I'm a Linux guy, but this is okay. Yeah, so I hope that helps you, Bwana Kiptanui. I've seen Evans has attempted to answer that. I hope you are now sorted. Joanna, you will get the recording. Malin, I don't think we need to do a lot of editing of this video. We could probably get it and put it on YouTube so that people can repeat and practice these things. Yes, Joanna, you'll be getting the recording. Michael Kamau, setting up the 2 servers. Maybe, Michael, you can clarify what you mean. I have seen a question where you're saying setting up the 2 servers. Brother Kamau. Kiptanui, the HTML, CSS, deployment, all those things, they are you can do it on Windows still, only that when you might install even a web server on Windows, you can install, I think, XAMPP or something. That's what we used to use sometimes back. But you can look at how to install a web server on Windows, or even you can install Microsoft IIS. I don't know whether it's free, but all you need to identify is the root folder for your web server, the server that you decide to use. In case you have a challenge setting up a server, please let us know. I want to give a clarification point. In an ordinary day-to-day deployment of websites, we don't do this. Most of the time, you'll find organizations have automated some of those things with those DevOps and all that. But the reason why I'm doing this manually is because I need you guys to know that the changes we make, the technologies we are adopting, you also need to know what problem we are fixing. Like now, I'm not using version. I'm not doing my versioning. So in case I change a file or I delete a file, these things will disappear. Like now, let me just come here and make a change here and say, this is after updates. Maybe I can say the version here is update 2. So I've just added a thing on the footer to say the version. And of course, for me to deploy the changes, I have to come here and I have to do the same thing that I did for SFTP, and I update the file. Of course, once I update the file, it will go to the server. Of course, I'm uploading everything. Now, if I go to the browser or any client, I'll be able to see update 2. But what this means is that if my friend wants to collaborate with me, I have to zip the folder, send it on email, they make the changes, and then they can. So normally what we used to do before we had versioning, we actually used to keep this code. After you release, you zip and you say, this is the version that I released on this day. So next time when you're making the change, you can decide what to do. But it was a nightmare, and that's why we had JIT or Git, depending on where you come from. So Kiptanui, can we make it with Windows, or do we need to migrate? You don't need to migrate to Linux. You can do all these things on Windows. We just need to know whether you have to install the web server locally, or you can use a server that is on the cloud. Maybe we spin up a VM and we can install Apache there so that you move the files there. So we will discuss that with Marlin and Tim, and we'll see how to facilitate how that will. We will see how to facilitate that. Of course, if you have any questions, that's why you have groups and you have mentors. Take advantage of all those conversations, because some of the questions you're asking, I know within your groups, you could find the answers already there. So I don't see any other question. Maybe I can ask, can we do a brief one on HTTP, then we end the day? And of course, that will allow you to see WireShark. Anyone with an objection? Anyone with an objection? Okay, I can see confirmation from Evans. Evans, thank you so much. Yes. Oh, yeah, Wesley will do the challenge. Sorry. Yes. So Marlin, let me just do a quick thing, and then I can hand it over to Wesley to do the challenge. Sorry for this. Let me just do a quick thing on WireShark, and then we can do the challenge. So I will open WireShark. You can install WireShark on your laptop. WireShark requires to access your network packets. And one of the key things that I'll do is that I'll open WireShark, and here you'll see the network interfaces that are there. I know some of you already boast in 127.0.0.1. It's called the loopback interface. You can see the loopback interface on my machine. And then if you're connected to Wi-Fi, I have another interface that is there. If your laptop has 3 NIC cards, then you'll be able to see all the interfaces there. This is not a networking class. So my assumption is that some of you know that computers require an interface for you to connect to the network. So you can see this thing telling me that there is data moving on. If you start WireShark without the admin rights, you might not access the network interfaces. So for me, I'm running it as an admin. So I can come here and I can click on the interface to say I capture. Now, for those of you who like hacking stuff, by doing so, my computer, we are seeing any packet being transferred from my computer to the internet. And you can see one of the things that you learned in school and ignored called UDP. Again, this is not a networking class, but UDP is used for transferring transport of data, user datagrams. And I can bet that the reason why you're seeing UDP connections is because of this call that we are having. So a lot of information, my sound is being sent as UDP packets, if I could use that. Now, one of the things that I want you to do is I want to use my tool here, and I'm going to use Postman now to create a new request. I'll create a new request, and let me see whether I can create a new request. Where do I create a new request? New. Okay. Let me just come here and access what I'm accessing on the browser here. So I will come here and I'll paste my URL here and I'll say get. Again, Postman is another tool. Of course, when you're doing get, you don't need to have the body. I know some of you might be wondering what I am doing, but don't worry. So this is another tool which we can show you for those guys who have never created APIs. But the basic idea is that it can be used in getting a file. And one of the things you'll notice is that the moment you say get, it returns the same file to us. So it still sends a HTTP request. So one of the things that I want to do is I'll use WireShark that captures the network packet, but I'll filter packets that are going to that IP. So I can use IP dot. If I say dot, then I'll start getting some suggestions, ADDR, and then I say equals to this. And I can do paste. But now, since there is so much data there, I want to come and do this. And I will come and exit on the server, because when you have an active SSH session, it will send data to the server. So I come and exit. And then I ensure that I come here and I clean this. And I say I want to continue without saving. So we have a clean sheet. So this guy is capturing traffic going via the internet, but then on my interface, EN0, and I'm only looking for packets that are going to our server. So for those of you who have never seen a HTTP request with your naked eyes, this is the session for you to see that. So what I'll do is I'll come here and I'll say, do this. And one of the things you'll see, the moment I hit send on the network, and I will stop now because I don't want to see so many things. The moment I hit send on the network, for those of you who can note by now, you can see that my laptop, which is 192, sent a message to 168. I will not give you much details, but the 3 frames you are seeing there is data being transferred from my server to the network. By just clicking send, get the file, I was able to trigger all this. The key thing that you need to note here is that there are packets that are TCP and others are HTTP. So you can come and use and HTTP here to just filter, and so that you see the HTTP request. HTTP protocol, which is a hypertext transfer protocol, is a protocol that works on 2 types of messages. You have a request and you have a response. So what you're seeing here is my IP.80 sending to the server.168. And of course, I send the request like this. Now, the key thing that I want to show you guys, and I will allow you guys to go and read these, and I'll come here and I will copy these and I'll put it as printable text. I'll highlight the header, HTTP. For those of you who know TCP IP layer, you can see IP layer, TCP, HTTP. If you studied OSI model, we will do another session maybe later so that we can show you those things. But the key idea here is that I want to show you how a HTTP request looks like with your naked eyes. So I'll come and create a new text and I say the HTTP request looks like this. Now, what does the response look like? So this is the response. The response looks like this, and I'll come here again and I'll copy this, and then I will show you the response. This is a HTTP response. Now, and of course that I copied this part here. There is another part here that is at the bottom, and I will come and copy this part here. Don't worry. So normally there is HTTP request has two parts. And I will not focus so much on, I'll copy as text because HTTP is a text-based protocol. And I hope I am not confusing someone. So if you come here, you'll see, and I'll demonstrate that the request ends there. And it has the first line, which is called the request line. And the request line has two parts. The method, in this case, we are using what? Get. Other methods exist post etc. So for those of you who have been using, and then after that, there is the second part separated by spaces. There are three parts. The second part gives us the resource. Please note that we have a space there. And then we get the resource. And our resource basically says which file we want to get. And then finally, the third part, then we have a space. And then the last part is actually called the HTTP version. So it means we are using HTTP version 1.1, which was created in 1999. Some of you might have heard about HTTP 2. That's what it means. No, now what? Sorry. I just deleted something. I wanted to just word wrap. Now, actually, let me remove the word wrap. So a HTTP request has the first line, and then after that, there are many other lines which we call the header. So all these things up to here, the last HTTP header. Now, and here, after the request line, we have the first HTTP header. Now, HTTP headers, if you can note, they take a certain format. It says a certain key, colon, space, value, key, colon, space, value, key, colon, space, value, key, colon, space, value. And they are all separated by a line. Of course, the line, the separator, the end of the line, so it takes the same key, colon, space, value, then /r/n. For those who did programming and they know carriage return and new line fit or the line fit. So that's how a header is specified. Of course, the request is also terminated by, and also finally here, I didn't tell you, and it's terminated, then there is the last part here, which is basically there, which you cannot see. They are called control, that one. You cannot see with your naked eyes. I'm not too sure whether it's /n/r or it's the other way around, but that one you can find out. After that, there is a special line here that is empty line in your naked eyes, but it's not empty. It's still a /r/n, which means that the end of header. After that, the rest of the stuff is the body. So this is the body. Of course, this is empty. We don't have a body in this request. Now, the response follows the same pattern. But now, the first line is called the response line. The response line has same parts. Then you have the first one is HTTP version. Then space. After the space, we have the HTTP status code. Then after that, we have space. And then there is also now the status description. For some of you know that HTTP 200 is that, then you do /r/n. So that's how you end. And of course, you get the headers the same way, header 1, and then this is the last header. How do you know it's the last header? Because after it, there is a what? A space, an empty line. So if you are a programmer and you want, of course, it's not an empty line. Actually, in real sense, it's a slash. Carriage return, what you cannot see with your naked eyes. Then after that, the body is the whole of this. The whole of this now becomes the body. Now, one of the things you'll notice that the content length has, as part of the header, we have something called the content length, which is saying 1180. Something exciting for you is that if I come here and I copy all these things up to there, then definitely you'll see that it is 1118 characters. So that's what the content length means. So that's how a HTTP request looks like and a HTTP response looks like. Now, of course, you have not seen the body here. And here we have seen the body. So it's possible, and I know some of you, you could have APIs where you're sending data in the body and you're getting data as part of the response. So this is how a HTTP request looks like, and that's how the response looks like. So one of the things that I will do is I will go back to where I was. I think I could, I don't know whether I can undo. Sorry. So I had another URL which I had created, which I will, for just argument's sake, I will not show that because I'll take a lot of time. So one of the things that I wanted you guys to note is that when the browser is asking for a page, they generate a HTTP request and you get the response. The response all the times has the content. Now, I just want to do one last experiment and you see how when you hit the request on Postman, we got the file back. But if you hit on the browser, something happens. The browser is intelligent. It goes through the source file, sees that you need a main CSS, and sees that you need a main.js, and gets those things. And after getting all that file, it renders the page for you. So by the time you're seeing this page, we have loaded the index.html. Inside the index.html, there are references to other files. The browser gets all of them. And for now, we have a number of files that we will mention. The first one is the main.css. The second one is the image. The fourth one is the main.js. And there is a fourth one, which you cannot see, but browsers always get that file and they always check whether the server has it. And it is this guy here called the favicon or favicon. So essentially, when I type this thing on the browser, the result is that we actually generate a HTTP request to get the file that was requested, and we know the resource here. Once we get it, because it is expected to be a HTML page, or it is expected to contain HTML content, the browser checks all the content, looks for all the links that are meant to be, not the links, looks for all the resources that we need to load for us to say that this page works, and gets each of them at a time. And once all of them are brought here, then we have the data being rendered. Actually, let me correct my statement a bit. The browser gets all the data, renders whatever that we have here, and in the background gets all the stuff in the background. That's why sometimes you can go to our web page, you see VAT calculator. If the internet is too slow, the image does not appear, but then it can come later. And I'm going to run one request onto the server, and I will run WireShark here. So I'll come here and I can capture, and I continue without saving. And then I come here and I just come to this browser and I copy the link and I open another tab and I come here, and maybe what I need to do is I can come here because sometimes HTTP has an interesting element that I won't focus right now. Sometimes the browsers have capability to do the caching. Now, what happens is that Tim Berners-Lee stated that when you hit these, all browsers, irrespective of the creator of the browser, they have to go through this process. So the first thing, if I come to WireShark and I can scroll here, the first thing some of you can already see, the first thing that was happened is that we got the first file and we got the response. If I come here and I minimize these so that you see the real content that was retrieved, you can see the web server gave us back the file, the wget calculator with our content. For those of you who have seen empty spaces, now you can see the new lines being rendered as characters on the browser. Once the browser got this stuff, and you can see the time, if some of you are keen on the time, once the browser sent the request at 30 seconds, 978 milliseconds, in about 400 milliseconds, we got the response. Immediately, the browser did the parsing of this file and realized we need 1, we need 2, and we need 3. And there is 4, which is the favicon icon, which is not rendered here. Talk of backfiring. You know, I was telling you guys how things will work, and then the favicon icon doesn't show up. But the browser has a capability called caching of files. Because if a file was not modified, why should I get it again? And that's why you can go to a website and the first time it is slow, but the second time it loads very fast. It's because of this thing called what? Some of the headers here. Like this guy says last modified on this, and then it tells you not keep alive. So it can tell you when the file was last modified. So it tells you the file was modified on 20th September 8:26 GMT. So if the browser had cached that file at 11 a.m. and you get the file and you're told that the file was last modified at this time, then you don't need to, you can cache it for some time and you keep it locally. All those details are specified within the standard. So once we got these, then we went and got the demo, CSS main, the SVG, and we got the JS. If you want to see how the responses look like, this is the response for the CSS, and this is the response for the JavaScript. So if you, JavaScript is hiding the content, yeah? But if you come here, you can see our function being displayed here, function calculate local. And finally, we have the final thing that is an SVG. So you can see how the SVG looks like. So you can see this is the CSS, this is the request, HTTP request to get, and this is there to get the CSS. This is the response to get the CSS. This is the request to get the SVG. This is the response to get the SVG. This is the request to get the JS. This is the response to get the JS. And with all these data, the browser can now follow the rules of JavaScript, CSS, and HTML to actually govern the interaction on the front end. I hope this has added some value to you guys. The key thing that we cannot forget is, as I summarize, is that the website is made up of many files. And those files, when they are put together, they form the website. These are pages, and some of them are HTML and other resources that we can talk about. These files have to be transferred to a web server. So if you're using a domain like google.com, those files have to be pushed to that server. And those files, for us to transfer that, we use tools like SFTP or SCP. And this is a legacy way of doing things, but the most basic way of doing things. And then those files have to be stored in a certain folder, which you've seen, the document root. And the document root, if you go to the browser, anyone can access anything in that folder, as long as it is within the document root and the permission allows. So permission is another thing that we don't want to mention. How do you access these files? You access them through a web browser, or you can use web clients, and you use these things depending on the scenario that you're looking at. So we have the web browser and you have the web client. For now, we have looked at the web browser, which is what the human users use. We've also seen Postman, which is something that the human users use, specifically called developers. We've also seen wget and curl, which is used by guys who do not have to be developers, but they have access and they don't have a GUI, but they just want to see the response and to get that file. So you can use wget to make HTTP requests. You can use curl to make HTTP requests. You can use Postman to make HTTP requests. There is also another special thing about the browser that is not with these other guys. The browser has the capability to get the file HTML, go through it, do the parsing of the tags, look for other files that are needed, and make other requests to get the files. And once those files are retrieved, then uses those files now to create the experience, the interactions that are required on the browser. So in the event the CSS file is never loaded because of maybe slow internet connection or someone deleted the file, of course, the browser has a way of defaulting to that. So I want to end there, and I leave you guys with one thing that we need to do. And maybe Marlin, if you guys don't mind, maybe tomorrow we can do a shorter session, but we can do 1 hour tomorrow, maybe at the same time. I just show you guys how now to do the calculation of the tags. Instead of doing it on the browser, like we did using JavaScript, because when you're doing this, if you note, let me just take a note. If I come here and I do calculation here, I get the amounts, but there is nothing sent on the network because the scripts are being executed on the browser or on the client, and sometimes we call them client-side scripting using JavaScript. But we want to introduce a scenario where instead of calculating this figure here, because maybe there are certain parameters that are stored in the DB somewhere in the backend, we expose an API or we create an API, and that API, we will have our web app trigger an API so that on the network using WireShark, we'll be able to see the data being sent. And we are going to send that data and see the response, get the response, and use the response to display the answers. So in other words, that's how most of the applications work. Unless you're dealing with a game, an online game that is played on the browser. But if you're dealing with networked applications, whether it's networked games, we must be able to send data, or even a tool where maybe you have a tracker for Forex, the rate changes and all that. We can do that from here. So I will end there. If you have any questions, please send it on the chat. And tomorrow, if the team allows, we will start by answering those questions when we meet. And I would like to get some feedback, whether your answers have been, whether your questions have been answered and whether you have benefited. Please feel free to comment on the chat so that we also know whether what we are doing is helpful. And if you have any suggestions, you can also share. There is one guy called Washira who is saying, is there a difference between network monitor on the element inspect option of the browser and this one? Thank you, Washira. We will answer that tomorrow. But yes, so there are ways of seeing what is being sent on the network. And Washira, you have a valid point. We will demonstrate that one as an alternative to using WireShark. But WireShark gives you more data, and we will verify that tomorrow. Yes. D, don't worry. There is so much that you have to go through, but I hope you have the time. If you have any questions, we are there to support you. So Marlin, over to you. I promise to try my best to keep time next time, but thank you guys for the patience.